This week's going to be a little bit different than all the other weeks. Normally, we've got a fund manager from one of the particular asset managers that joins us and helps us and to convey a message. This week, we're talking about the 5 principles that investors can't ignore, the 5 investment principles that we can't ignore. So while we have a couple of people still joining us on this webinar, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. Also, our guest speaker or someone that will be doing a part of the conversation is Leon Marais. I want to just to confirm with you, if you're an investor, if you might be in the unprivileged position that you might have been retrenched, or in the privileged position that you are retiring currently or in the process of retiring, you're in the right place to hear about 5 very, very important principles that we at Good for Sure apply and that you should consider when thinking about or positioning particular investments for a particular period of time, whatever the case might be. So we've got a new button. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. It's a set up a consultation or call button. So if you're an existing client or a new contact or someone that has joined this webinar, and somewhere throughout this presentation, you feel that you would like to speak to someone in a private manner, maybe a phone call or an email, or maybe over a Zoom or Skype meeting, please hit the button. It will open a small page where you just select existing client or new contact consultation, and you select an advisor. If you're an existing client, pick your advisor from the list. It will open a small calendar, and on that calendar, you can choose a date and time that suits you best to do a consultation or just a quick phone call with your advisor or with someone that just can assist you or answer a couple of questions. So please make use of this functionality. It's just to make it easier for you to get a hold of us. Down into 2 sections, like I said. You've got the asset class diversification and the asset management style diversification. So I want to start by talking to you about the asset class diversification. All right. So this is a very, very busy slide, but don't let it confuse you. So let's just explain it how it works, because what we refer to as a little bit of a smarty box. So we've grouped several different asset classes or asset types or return bundles, if you can call it that. So let's just start. SA real estate, SA equity, diversified foreign equity, SA bonds, SA cash, and we've got South African CPI in here as well. So these are the years 1st of April or 1st of March 2005 to end of February 2006. So it's not to show you which asset class did the best, or SA real estate did this. This is to show you how asset classes go from one year to the other year. It's to show you that how a diversified portfolio or an asset class diversified portfolio moves around the median. So let's draw up a line. It's the one right in the middle, the red line that I've put in on let's say the 4th asset class or the 4th group from the top. So we're going to follow the diversified portfolio. So if you check it, how it moves, it's always a little bit around the red line. So that's over a 15-year period. If we compare that to other asset classes, and I'm not going to do it with a line, otherwise we're going to get very, very, in Afrikaans, demakar. So it's SA real estate there, top asset class. Then it falls all the way there. So you just follow my mouse. It's very up and down. Then the best, then almost the worst. It's really all over the show, where diversified portfolio keeps up with the mean, more or less. Always say 1 deviation up, maybe 2 at the most, down 2 at the most. If we show it over the 5-year, 10-year, and 15-year return, you'll see we've got the red line there, and then we've got a diversified portfolio, 1 deviation away from the mean, and then 2 up, and then 1 that's straight on the mean. So it's just to show that asset class diversification eliminates or reduces the volatility that a portfolio has from moving from up there to down there, up there to down there. So it's all around the mean. All right. So the next one is just in a bar graph. So I've just gone and taken the 5-year, 10-year, and 15-year portfolio, and then I've put it into bar graphs. There's no, like, let's call it skyscrapers in a particular year, except something like foreign equity. In any of these 5 years, diversified portfolio has not performed negative. So it's the only portfolio that in the 5 years negative is SA Real Estate. That wasn't a great asset class for the last 5 years, but it still gives a lot of opportunity. Once again, it's the first time in very, very long time, and Leon can maybe give us the more direct stats about that a diverse portfolio did not outperform inflation. So over 10 years, it has a significant outperformance of inflation, as well as over 15 years, and in 5 years, it did not outperform it there. All right. So now we get to style diversification. Now, the next slide, different styles, different people, different styles. You've got a Gothic on the left, you've got traditional African style on the right, you've got your pop in the middle, or your 80s or 90s or whatever it might be. It's all about style. So different styles, there's no one right style or wrong style, but it's a combination of different styles that make things work. So when I talk about style diversification, or when we talk about it in investment terms, we talk about blending asset managers. So not one particular asset manager has the same style. Some of them do have similar styles, but each of them have a uniqueness to them. Let's use an example: Coronation Fund Managers and Allan Gray Fund Managers. We had them on our live webinars in the past, so it's not that I'm comparing them. The reason why I bring it out is because we use it in our portfolios together. We use Coro Balanced together with Allan Gray Balanced as two balanced funds in one portfolio, one wrap fund or one moderate or moderate aggressive portfolio. The reason being is the correlation is lower. So if Coronation, say, moves up a little bit, Allan Gray just follows suit. Their management styles differ, meaning that they correlate lower, the correlation is lower, meaning that gives the clients and it gives investors a next level or a little bit of more diversification than just having one balanced fund within a portfolio. So blending asset managers brings another form of diversification in. So once again, the first principle is diversification between asset classes. And it's not that one asset class is better than the other. It's just diversification means that we're going to have less movement up and down than if you had everything, say, in equities or foreign equities or property like you've seen in the Smarty Box. And blending of asset managers helps a lot to just bring out almost that human element, where we say that if one asset manager might get it wrong for a particular period of time, the other one might get it right. And that's why we use different asset managers within a portfolio. All right. So the next one. The next one is quite an interesting one, and you can actually spend a whole live webinar or a whole section or a series on this. And that's the one about short-term versus long-term. Now, please get me wrong. This is not a battle of the asset classes. It's not cash versus equity or property versus bonds. This is choosing the right asset class for the right term investment. Some asset classes perform differently than other ones. When I say perform differently, I mean the movements, the volatility, the ups, the downs, it's different from other ones. Let's use an example. Someone's 55 or 60 years old and they retire, and a certain component of their investment portfolio or funds available to invest is, say, 100,000 Rand. And they say, you know what, this 100,000 Rand, I want to invest as a investment for an emergency fund. And I might need it in 6 months' time, I might need it in 12 months' time. It doesn't matter. Anywhere in the future, not knowing when, I might need to call on that investment in a short period of time. All right. So immediately I think short term, we think short term, we know, you know what, the client can phone up anytime and say, I need that money, my car's tires, or I need to pay a medical bill, or whatever the case might be. All right. So it is short term. So it's very important to choose the right asset class for your short term investments. Another client comes, or the same client, say at 60, come and say, you know what, besides from that 100,000 Rand for the emergency fund, I need to put away this 2 million or 3 million or 4 million Rand to give me a monthly income. I'm 60 years old, my life expectancy, according to Stats SA, say is 90 or 95 or whatever the case might be, but it's a long-term investment. It's from 60 to 90, it's a 30-year term. So it's longer term. It's not, I might need the money tomorrow. And I don't need to draw from the capital. I need to be able to draw a constant income that keeps up with inflation over a long period of time. So a graph shows this very, very well. So let's have a look at this first short-term versus long-term graph. If you're going to have a look at these 4 different lines, I'm going to start with the red one. That's one of the biggest asset, or one of the biggest balance fund in South Africa. The black line is the JSE All Share Index, and then you've got the light gray, which is your money market, South African money market, and then the other one right at the bottom there is your South African CPI, normal South African CPI. So example, that 100% or that 100,000 Rand investment that the particular person needed to make, or client needed to make, if they were to put it into this money market in 2000, they could draw anywhere in here, 6 months down the line, 5 months down the line, 8 months down the line, doesn't matter when, they could call up and say, I want 15,000 Rand immediately, please. Doesn't matter what the markets, no, sorry, you can't have money, the market is down. No, that's why that money market there, or that cash instrument type investment there, is a very suitable investment for someone that needs to invest money for a short period of time. It's not going to outperform inflation by much. It's actually just going to outperform inflation over a 20-year period, it's a 20-year graph, by a little bit. If you have a look, it's 361 plus 193. So let's say we're talking 150, 160, around there. So that's the outperformance over 20 years. So let's say that same client that invested 100,000 Rand in the money market, which would be the right thing to do for a emergency fund investment, invested their 3 million Rand for their investment, or for their pension fund to give them income in that money market as well. After 20 years, that's the difference between inflation and their cash. That would actually not be enough. If you look at the next graph, and I'll come back to the red and the black graphs to put it in perspective. If we have a look at the green one, the green line is South African inflation plus 5%. So that's more or less closer to what the cost of living actually increases by. Because, you know, we've got the basket inflation, and yes, we need to use it when we do these graphs. But in real life, out there, talking to retired clients, people actually, that 5% or 5.8 or whatever the case might be is not enough. It's inflation plus 4, 5 that the cost of stuff actually gets more expensive, or stuff gets more expensive by. So we need to outperform that. And if you were invested in a money market with your pension money for 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, you would actually not have outperformed inflation plus 5%. So that gets me back to this graph. If someone invested their emergency fund there, which some people would have maybe done or chosen to do, it can happen that they actually had a dip. They invested there and the money fell. And when they phoned up, they said, I need my money, but sorry, it's 10,000 Rand less because the market crashed. That particular fund would not be suitable for a short duration investment, which would be an emergency fund. So let's say that person decided to invest their retirement savings. No asset, only asset class diversification, no blending of asset class of managers. So they just chose one balanced fund straight up. They put all their money in this one particular balanced fund. And there's your global financial crisis in 2008. And there's February 2020, where the markets crashed, the COVID-19 crash that we're also familiar with, and we've touched on that several times. So even over a 20-year period with two major crashes, this red portfolio, which as a diversified asset class portfolio, not management style diversification, has actually given you 1,427% return. So forget about the cumulative return. The principle stays that if you invest in a diversified asset class portfolio over a long period of time, you will outperform inflation, or the potential is there to outperform inflation. It is not a guarantee that to outperform inflation over the long term, or actually inflation plus 5%. So this portfolio has actually outperformed the JSE over 20 years. Maybe not fair to the JSE All Share because it's just after a major crash. 2-3 years down the line, it might look a little bit different. But for all practical reasons, now you are there. So the principle number 2 of short versus long is not cash versus diversified or property versus equity. It's all about choosing the right asset class for the right type of investment. All right. So it's all about making sure that you position your investment, if it's short term or long term, to obtain or achieve the goal that you have actually put out for that investment. And if it's to give you long-term income or long-term growth, asset class diversification with asset management blending is a way to do that. So the second one is making sure short-term versus long-term. So that's all from me.
We're taking the time to listen to us. Like Barry said, we'll try and keep it short and sweet. So he's discussed 2 of the topics. Now, 3 of the others that I will be discussing. Firstly, we're talking tax and investments. Obviously, tax is something that no one likes to pay, but it does play a role with investments. But it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all, but it is still important to consider different moves and how it affects your investment. So firstly, I'm going to look at different investment products, then the taxation of the different asset classes, and then how to produce a tax-efficient income at retirement, after retirement. So firstly, there's 2 broad categories for money or capital that you have available. Firstly, we're talking compulsory capital. So that's typically your pension fund, your provident fund, preservation funds, or retirement annuities that you would have acquired through your working career. Then there's also discretionary capital. That's typically unit trusts or shares, endowment policies, tax-free savings accounts that came in a few years ago, and normal savings accounts at the banks. All of these products, different sets of rules, different sets of tax rules as well. And it's obviously important to navigate between these products and use them in a manner that gets the best after tax return, because that's the bottom line that we are all after. So then just in terms of the different asset classes, how they are taxed, investment returns can typically consist of 4 major components. So the first is interest, then we've got dividends, we've got capital gains, and we've got rental income. Now, obviously there's different tax rules according to each one. Current tax legislation gives that you have interest exemptions, you have capital gains exemptions. So by using different asset classes in a portfolio, one could get a more tax efficient return. For example, if you had everything into a money market or a savings account at the bank, you would be earning 100% interest. Everyone gets an annual exclusion, but after that, it is taxed at your marginal tax rate. So usually interest or rental income, that's another one. There's no exemption on rental income. Those 2 are the most negative in terms of tax, where capital gains and dividends are a lot more favorable. So one typically tries to move towards those 2 asset classes, which is typical in terms of offshore investing as well as equities. And interesting enough, the 2 asset classes the most tax efficient is also the 2 that's best for long-term returns. So it's not by chance, it is the way it's supposed to be. Then we're looking at tax efficient income. Now you get to retirement, you've got all these different vehicles that you've got invested. You've got your discretionary capital, you've got your compulsory capital, and you've got other income, which could be a rental property or some income that you get from other sources. You've written a book or you've got a little business on the side. It all feeds into what I can get after tax in terms of income. No one goes into Pick n pays with pre-tax money, or technically you can if you write it all for business. But the bottom line is we want to spend after tax income. We're looking at an example. Client retires at age 60. It's got 3.5 million in the pension fund and 1.3 million rand in an investment plan. That means discretionary capital. And the requirement of 20,000 rand per month as an after-tax income. So there's two components. There's the compulsory component, the pension fund. That could also be a RA or preservation fund or a provident fund. And then discretionary capital, the 1.3 million. We used an example as an investment plan. It could be unit trust, it could be shares, it could be a money market, it could be endowment. At the time, obviously at the time, the client wants 20,000 after tax to provide for his monthly expenses. If we initially said the client draws the full amount out of the compulsory component, so the 1.3 million is there, but it's more for capital growth or whatever the case may be, the 3.5 million, if I only draw income from there, I would need to draw 23,500 before tax to give me 20,000 rand after tax. That's now assuming your primary rebates and all these things that goes into tax law. That means on the total investment amount of 4.8 million, it is a withdrawal of 5.875 per year, which, so just keep that number in mind. We'll show you how this all works together. So then we look at the same example, same parameters. We have 3.5 million in the pension fund, 1.3 million in the investment plan, and there's still a requirement of 20,000 after tax per month. Now at retirement, one can take 500,000 as a lump sum out of your compulsory capital without paying tax on it. There is certain, let's say, change or different scenarios where one could have a bigger amount tax-free or even a smaller amount tax-free. So that will depend on individual basis. But let's, for this example, client retires, takes 500,000 tax-free, and then that 500,000 can be added to the discretionary capital, which is your after-tax capital. So that leaves you with 3 million compulsory capital and 1.8 million in discretionary capital. Now, instead of drawing the full income amount from just the compulsory component, we now draw it from both sides, which means, firstly, because on compulsory capital, you are taxed as if it's income, just plain like you would have had your salary. On discretionary capital, it's after-tax money, so you're only taxed on the growth. And if you're investing it smartly and you're using different asset classes, you can get that tax number quite low. So that means you suddenly only need to withdraw 21,500 rand before tax on a monthly basis. And that means it's only 5.375 per year on the total amount. I might say, okay, 0.5%, that's the only difference. 0.5% is still a massive implication. If you take that on these numbers over a 30-year term, you're looking at about 700,000 rand that you can save just on tax. And I mean, that's a small little component. There's obviously per individual cases, there is more scenarios, and with the introduction of tax-free savings accounts that we've seen these days, this number could change even, the difference can go even wider. But then we're looking at risk profiles. Now, risk profiles fits in quite nicely with Barry's component about long-term and short-term, as well as blending fund managers. Now, we've all seen the basics of investments, like they tell you investments 101. The higher the risk, the higher the return. But also the lower the risk, the lower the return. So it's always difficult to find that middle ground. Then we've all seen these risk profiles, and everyone looks different. Everyone is differently branded. Some have only 3 categories, some have 6 categories. I've even seen some with 9 categories. There's different years. It's very difficult to interpret. So what does it all mean? And is it just if I'm scared of the market, like a lot of people would be at the moment with the current movements that we've seen, should I be a conservative investor, or what is the determining factor to your risk profile? Now, a risk profile is basically compiled of three components. You'll see where the overlap is between these three components. That is your risk profile. So firstly, it is your risk tolerance. That's the one it's basically how the markets and how movements on investments makes you feel. Now, humans are emotional and we do overreact, and even us who work in the industry and watch these numbers every day, even we have days where we doubt ourselves and start wondering, isn't this a time to move out or move in because I just can't take it anymore. So it is a role, and one has to bear that in mind. But one also has to look at the risk that is required. The risk required it's a difficult concept in a way, but it's also, like Barry said, if we're looking at a long-term investment, you simply cannot be in a money market account when you just about scraping the inflation rate that is published by the government, but we actually need a much higher rate of return, and that is the risk required. So yes, risk required, it means that there will be more movement on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis, but we need to also understand that we need to get to a long-term requirement or a long-term good return above inflation. And then the last component is risk capacity. That's obviously your ability to take risk. If you only have 100,000, it might be difficult to put it into a more aggressive portfolio. So then typically one would be a little bit more conservative with it and rather have more of a certain outcome over the short term. Now, the risk capacity, obviously your level of income at retirement or your term till retirement, these all play a role when looking at risk capacity. And all of these factors combined gives you a risk profile. So no one's risk profile is the same, but I think it is important to remember that all retirement income or retirement investments is typically a long-term investment. A lot of people go very conservative and say that it's retirement money. Yes, it is retirement money, and one can't make it up again. You're not in a position where you can work again, but you still need to outperform inflation. So that is where the risk profiling comes in, to make sure that we are in the right asset class to supply you with sufficient income or sufficient growth for your specific investment needs. So risk profile is more actually risk management. I'm a firm believer that you can't ignore risk. You have to take some form of risk, otherwise you won't outperform inflation, and that's the bottom line of investing. If you're not outperforming inflation, I might as well spend the money now. If you ask my wife, she's quite good at spending money. So yeah, she'll say challenge accepted, but with investments and long-term investing, we need to manage this risk to make sure that we can provide returns above inflation. Then my next component is compounding. So that's obviously, you can look at recurring investments and lump sum investments. It does affect the compounding of the investments differently. Simple example, if I invest R1 million and I grow it at 10% per year. That means I'm getting 100,000 Rand per year, which I can either withdraw or I can reinvest. So if I take the 100,000 that I'm getting as a return and I put it under my bed, after 10 years, I would have R1 million under my bed. That would be quite nice, but that's unfortunately the situation. If I chose to, so that would mean if I have R1 million that I've taken out and I still have my R1 million initial investment, gives me a total amount of 2 million Rand. If I ever decide to not withdraw the money and I can get growth on growth, that means now the first year's 100,000 goes into the 1 million as well, so I've got 1.1 million, and that grows at 10%. So this is a graph. The dark blue line, the bottom line, is if I withdrew my amounts every year and I put it elsewhere, it means my 1 million would have gone to 2 million over 10 years. That will be my total investment amount. And the opposite, the one above it, is if I actually now say I want to reinvest these capitals. So the initial, you'll see on the graphs, it says the initial investment amount, if I withdrew every year 100,000, it would give me 2 million at the end of the term. If I ever reinvested, that 2 million would be 2.5 million. So the 1 million would have grown to 2,593. And that's a difference of 593,000. And in essence, that is compounding. That's the difference between taking the money out or reinvesting it so that it can grow more. So every year the profit will also grow after that. If I look at the same graph, but I look at 20 years, obviously the longer the period, the more the compounding effect. So your 1 million in the same example that we used, if I'd taken out the 100,000 each year, I would have had 3 million at the end of the 20-year term. If I looked at reinvesting the money, my 1 million would have been 6.7 million. And you can see the difference between the two is now 3.7 million, which is a substantial amount. It means that you've now almost more than double where you would have been, and that's just due to compounding. That's the only difference between these two portfolios. And then if we extend it even further and we look at a 30-year period, then your 1 million after, if you had taken out the annual growth, would have been 4 million. But if you had reinvested it, it would have grown to 17 million. It's a staggering number. And it shows you the value of compounding. Now, these things can be drawn back to someone that is saving towards retirement, or even someone that is at retirement and has to look at a 30-year investment horizon. So it does play a role in terms of the level of income one takes and all of these things. It shows you time in the market is more important than time in the market. You're never going to get the bottom right or the top right, like we've heard from our speakers the last few weeks. The bottom line is long-term investing, through long-term investing, and making sure that compounding works for you. And just a rule of thumb, there's a short-term little cheat sheet, if you want to call it, the rule of 72. It means if you take 72 divided by the number of your rate of return, in this example 10%, it should take you roughly 7.2% to double your money. So obviously the higher your compounding or your rate of return, the quicker your compounding effect. So for example, if you only had a 5% rate of return, then you're looking at about 14 years to double your money. So that is quite interesting. And obviously you want higher growth, but you also want long term. Those things make the investment worthwhile in the end, the compounding works for you. If we then look at the same example and saying, well, now instead of having a lump sum where I had R1 million to invest, what would be the case if I invest on a monthly basis? Obviously, we always preach that the sooner you start, the better it is. So we're looking at two examples. The first line is, we just use it as Jane. Now, Jane starts saving R1,000 a month, or R1,000 a year, sorry, for 10 years. You'll see that's the first red component, that's the period. So that first 10 years, she is saving R1,000 per year, and then stops contributing and just lets it grow. Then Paul only starts at the end of the 10 years where Jane stops contributing, Paul starts contributing. He's not contributing R1,000 a year, but he's contributing R2,000 a year. Try and catch up what he's already been behind in terms of savings compared to Jane. And then he contributes not for 10 years, but he contributes for 20 years. And still, the scenario is in total where he's contributed R24,000 into the investment. She's only contributed 10,000 into the investment, and yet she's outperformed him over the period. She's got a bigger lump sum at the end of the 30 years. So it's a simple example, but it shows starting early and compounding on compounding. It's what compounding can do if you're given it the correct time frame. So then it comes down to the 5 principles again that we've discussed. I can just quickly touch on the component that Barry asked about in terms of diversified portfolios that underperformed inflation over the 5 years. It is a bit of an anomaly. Now, obviously, if you're looking at the diversified portfolio, you're typically looking at about 60% in equity, of which about a third will be offshore equity. Offshore equity has done fairly well, or very well, to be honest, in the last 10 years. A component of that obviously would have been the currency that has weakened significantly. And like we've seen last week from Peter Duminy from Sun Private Wealth, the expectation is that the rand's actually weakened too much. So the biggest component of a diversified portfolio would have been local equities, which has struggled the last 5 years. So that is typically the reason why a diversified portfolio over this 5-year period has struggled against inflation. But over longer periods, and even if you look at forward, this is the asset class, this is the type of approach that one would like to be into an investment amount. And then also what we also look at too, I mean, yes, we've talked about risk profiles, we've talked about long-term and short-term, but it is also uncomfortable seeing markets move, and usually investors want stable returns. And I think that's where diversification plays a big role as well. And then all of these components has their little role. If each component can just add 0.5% of value over a year, then suddenly it adds up. And that's where compounding then really makes a big difference. So for us, it's always about getting the need, what the client needs, and what the objective is, getting that correct, and making sure that long term we are achieving these goals to make sure that we outperform inflation, we pay as little tax as possible. I've never had an argument with that. Most people prefer to pay less tax. And then also making sure that you are comfortable and stable in the situation, that you're not, I mean, yeah, we all had a few sleepless nights recently with the markets, but also being sure that one understands what's going on and how the investments are allocated and performing under these circumstances. So that is
people listening in. Thanks for answering the questions from the clients and giving clarity on that as well. So like we said in the past, we want to keep it sweet. We want to keep it short. It's been say 45 minutes. We're going to end it off. Please, the set up a consultation button is still there. If you've got a need to talk to us directly or speak to your advisor just on a phone call, use the functionality that we've put there. I'm also going to put up a screen and share it for a while still, where all the advisors' email addresses and cell phone numbers are up there as well. So if you want to send them a WhatsApp or give them a shout, please do so. And thanks for joining us. Look out for the invite for next week, Tuesday, 4 o'clock, same place, same time. Great. Thank you for watching. Please, in the description below to this video, there is a link that says schedule an appointment. Please use that link to schedule a meeting with one of the advisors if you have a need or just want to touch base or get some advice regarding investments. Thank you for watching again, and please look out for the invite for our next live webinar, and please subscribe to our channel and you'll get more info and added value in this way. Thank you very much.